I mean, there were other free agency moves, and Paul George is the biggest of the summer. He is planning to sign a 4-year deal with the 76ers.
Kawhi Leonard is so much easier to plug in to any lineup.
A huge chapter in the history of the Los Angeles Clippers has officially concluded, a chapter that is a nightmare for this organization, one that will cripple the organization for years to come, and something that I felt like definitely deserved its own video. I understand that there's a lot of free agency content going on right now. If there's any breaking news, I'll make sure that you get a double upload day today. But before we get to the content, we are less than 43,000 subscribers away from 1 million subscribers. So if you want to help us reach our goal, make sure you subscribe and turn on our notifications to help us get there. Now that we get all that out of the way, cue the intro. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? The 2019 offseason is a offseason that is very near and dear to my heart. It was the very first time I had success covering the NBA, and it without a doubt changed my entire life. And one of the things that I'll always remember is Kawhi Leonard's decision. You see, Kawhi Leonard was leaving the Toronto Raptors despite just winning a championship with them, and he decided that he no longer wanted to be the dominant force in the East, which in hindsight may have been a horrible decision by him because he would have had some easy runs to the NBA Finals. Instead, he longed to go out west and he wanted to play in Los Angeles because his home was originally in California. So he was choosing between the Los Angeles Lakers and the Los Angeles Clippers. The Lakers weren't really seriously in the conversation for Kawhi Leonard. Rather, Kawhi was just leading them on to make sure that the Lakers would miss out on other significant free agents. Meanwhile, he was orchestrating one of the greatest power moves in NBA history. He told the Los Angeles Clippers that he would sign with them if they also got Paul George. At the time, the OKC Thunder were reeling from an embarrassing first-round exit at the hands of the Portland Trailblazers. I'm sure you guys remember this.
Goodness, look at that shot. To put them out, he went for 50 points.
But the OKC Thunder realized the leverage they had on the Los Angeles Clippers. Essentially, if the Clippers didn't get Paul George, then they would not be able to get Kawhi Leonard, and then they would be just one of those teams with a tremendous amount of assets, but unable to cash in those assets in order to get any true stars. So the OKC Thunder told the Los Angeles Clippers that if you want to get Paul George, you need to make us an offer that we cannot refuse. In that offer, they were expecting a young star, which the Los Angeles Clippers had one in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, but in addition to Shai, they wanted multiple draft picks. Now, I don't know how much I could trust Doc's take on this because he's been playing Captain Hindsight a lot lately, but Doc Rivers even told Kawhi Leonard, "Are you sure you want to trade Shai? I think Shai is going to be an amazing player. It may take a year or two, but I think you're underestimating how good Shai is going to be." I didn't argue the decision or anything, but I brought it up. I just thought, is there any way we can do this deal without putting Shai in it? You have to understand that at the time, the norm for trading future first round picks wasn't asking for future first round picks 6 or 7 years down the line. If you go back to the trade that people are saying is the worst trade in NBA history, where the Brooklyn Nets agreed to a trade on June 28th, 2013 for Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett, in that case, the furthest out draft pick was a 2018 first round pick, and it was only 3 first round picks and a pick swap. Don't get me wrong, this was absolutely crippling for the Brooklyn Nets. When you compare this trade to the Los Angeles Clippers trade for Paul George, it's a completely different animal. The Los Angeles Clippers would receive Paul George, but the OKC Thunder received Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Danilo Gallinari, Miami's 2021 unprotected first round pick, the Clippers 2022 unprotected first round pick, a 2023 pick swap with the Clippers, which wasn't conveyed, a 2024 unprotected first round pick from the Clippers, a 2025 protected first round pick from the Heat, and the right to swap 2025 picks with the Clippers and the Clippers 2026 unprotected first round pick, meaning that they had draft picks 6 and 7 years out from the date of the trade planned, which is absolute insanity. But on top of that, the Clippers gave up the runner-up to this year's MVP in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, in addition to so much draft control that they without a doubt turned the OKC Thunder into the next NBA dynasty. I mean, the Miami Heat 2021 unprotected first turned into Trey Mann, the Clippers 2022 unprotected first turned into Jalen Williams, but at the time it didn't really matter because the Los Angeles Clippers were the top team in the West for about 2 years. Do you remember what they were saying at the time this trade went down?
I think the Clippers are a better team.
Well, they are. And start with the fact defensively, who's gonna score against the Los Angeles Clippers?
I know.
I mean, it's incredible. Kawhi Leonard is so much easier to plug in to any lineup. You just plug him in almost anywhere and he's going to be fine. He just blends right into what they're doing. And I would say the same thing about Paul George.
And it wasn't to say that this is incorrect. You have two of the best two-way players in the NBA. You could plug in Paul George and Kawhi Leonard on any team in the NBA and they will work out somehow, some way. But ultimately, we know what would happen. The only time Kawhi and PG would be healthy in the postseason was during the bubble, when Paul George played his worst basketball of his career and the Clippers would go up 3-1 versus the Denver Nuggets in the second round of the playoffs and then blow a 3-1 series lead to the Nuggets, depriving NBA fans of the Los Angeles Clippers versus the Los Angeles Lakers at a neutral playing site, meaning this wouldn't be at Crypto Arena, this was going to be in a bubble with no fans, because historically Crypto Arena was a little bit favored towards the Lakers, and we were robbed of that because Paul George decided to play like ass. And unfortunately, that was the last time these two would be healthy during the playoffs. The next year, they would finish fourth in the West and they would make it to the conference finals, the furthest that this team would ever make it, but Kawhi would get hurt and the Clippers would lose to the Suns 4-2. The very next year, Kawhi would be injured and the Clippers would finish 8th in the West. It would make it to the play-in tournament, but not the playoffs. In the 2022 to 2023 season, both PG and Kawhi would get injured and they would lose in the first round of the playoffs to the Suns. And then this past year, the Clippers went all in, mortgaging even more of their future so they could bring on James Harden. And ultimately, that would result in another first round exit because Kawhi Leonard would once again get injured. And the way things stand currently for the Los Angeles Clippers is, I don't care how big of a fan of theirs you are, you have to admit this team got worse over the offseason. They lost Paul George for nothing, and the craziest part is they could have gotten him for something. I mean, Draymond Green even said so in his podcast.
I mean, there were other free agency moves, and Paul George is the biggest of the summer. He is planning to sign a 4-year deal with the 76ers. Also a little salty about that because Paul George was going to come to the Warriors, and we wanted Paul George to come to the Warriors. For us to get Paul George, it would have taken a sign and trade, and the Clippers didn't really want to play ball. Didn't really want to help him get to where he wanted to go, and so in turn, they get nothing back. And, whereas you could have gotten something back for Paul George walking, they get absolutely nothing back. So that didn't quite pan out for us, which would have been nice.
Now, the Warriors had all the leverage in the world in a potential Paul George trade. There's no question about it. It's an opt-in and trade, meaning that the Warriors knew that Paul George was no longer going to return to the Los Angeles Clippers. They were lowballing him, for crying out loud. And the reason why trade talks fell through was because the Warriors didn't want to include Jonathan Kuminga in a trade with the Clippers. According to Ramona Shelburne, the Warriors offered multiple combinations of expiring contracts, young players, and an unprotected 2027 first-round pick. The Clippers countered by asking for prized youngster Jonathan Kuminga. The Warriors resisted because Kuminga is so important to their own future, but they were also worried that Paul George wouldn't be as interested in joining them if they gave up too much to get him. At several points, it seemed that the teams might reach a deal as talks took place at both the ownership and executive levels, but they never found common ground on the financial implications for the Clippers, as they did with George. LA held firm on not taking back contracts that would land it over the second apron unless there were compelling reasons to do so. Now, The Athletic on Saturday said that isn't necessarily true. The Warriors' offers for George consisted of some combination, but not all of Andrew Wiggins, Chris Paul, Jonathan Kuminga, or Moses Moody, plus one future first-round pick. The fact that the Clippers didn't take any package that the Warriors wanted to give them is absolutely insane, because they ended up losing Paul George for nothing. And now you're going into next season with just James Harden, Kawhi Leonard, and maybe Russell Westbrook if you don't trade him? So the Clippers clearly overplayed their hand. And the fact that they rejected this trade with or without Kuminga is absolutely insane. I mean, an unprotected 2027 first-round pick from the Warriors could turn into a very valuable pick. With all due respect, Steph Curry is going to be 39 years old in that season. And the fact that they turned this down is mind-boggling to me. You don't need Jonathan Kuminga for this to be a good deal. Just get something nothing in return for Paul George. At this point, I hope the Los Angeles Clippers are realistic with where they're at as an organization, and that's the fact that your championship window has shut. It's unfortunate that it happened this way. I mean, if Kawhi and Paul George were fully healthy, who knows? Maybe you have a ring to show for this trade. If you sign James Harden for maybe $10 million less per year, then you may have a good trade chip in him, or maybe at the very minimum next year he'd be a great trade chip as an expiring contract. But at this point, if you're the Clippers, you're trying to get something in return for Kawhi Leonard and James Harden, and you're fully in sell mode from this point and on. Sure, you don't have your first round pick until 2026, but it's never too early to start stockpiling assets. The worst part of all is this unprotected first round pick from the Warriors would have set them up so well, but they got too greedy and they wanted some sort of young star to build around moving forward that they ended up getting absolutely nothing in return. And that's why I think this is the worst trade in NBA history, because in 2013 the Brooklyn Nets swung this huge trade and it clearly didn't pan out, but 5 years later they made it back into the playoffs and they were able to attract Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and eventually trade for James Harden. Yeah, the front office kind of botched that situation as well, but they were contending 5 years later. But in the case of the Los Angeles Clippers, I'm just seeing them make bad decision after bad decision after bad decision over and over and over again that I really don't know how you dig yourselves out of this hole. I mean, you don't have draft control until 2030. You don't have a single asset on this team. You can't even rebuild if you wanted to. And you're losing your best players for absolutely nothing, while the Western Conference is getting more and more competitive. It's kind of crazy. We might not see the Los Angeles Clippers return to the playoffs for at least another decade. But let me know in the comment section down below. Do you agree that this is the worst trade in NBA history? I'd like to hear what you have to say. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike. I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.